Welcome to When Everything Breaks, talks on challenge, opportunity, and equity, a conversation with APA Los Angeles on realism, idealism, and the planning profession. My name is Lisa Varon, and I am a member of the APA's Programs and COVID-19 Response Committees. I want to thank you for joining us today for this conversation, which is the second in our series that APA Los Angeles is bringing to you. I'm thrilled to be able to be a part of today, and I want to thank our sponsors, the Pepperdine School of Public Policy, KOA, WSP, Gruen Associates, CHS, Chen Ryan, Placeworks, and the Reed Law Group. I also am thrilled to be able to bring some speakers to you and in conversation, Rick Willson, Tunua Thrash-Ntuk, Carina Campos, and Maya Abood. Why don't we start with some introductions, and you can each share a little bit about yourselves for our participants today. Why don't we start with Maya?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa, and hope everyone can hear our audio and a little bit. So the difficulties of the COVID time. Can everyone hear me okay? Just gonna see if the other panelists. Yes? Okay. We'll see. We'll see how things go. But my name is Maya. I work for the Housing and Community Investment Department, Los Angeles, in the Policy and Research Unit. And that means anything related to affordable housing policy. I think that ever since my audio is not working, let me hop off for a minute. I'm going to try it.
Okay, wonderful. Let's have Carina introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today and be joining you guys in this conversation. My name is Carina, and I'm with the City of Azusa Economic Development Division. I've been with the city roughly 4.5, almost 5 years. I first started with the city working as an intern for one of our commissions, specifically doing work with our youth around programming, youth programming, and social justice. And now I am in the Economic Development Division working with our business community and being a business liaison to them. Azusa is a small city of about 50,000 residents. We're located in the San Gabriel Valley, which is about 20 miles east of LA. I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. I'm a San Gabriel Valley girl. I'm a daughter to immigrant parents. I grew up working in our family-owned restaurant from a very young age and didn't transition until I came to the city to work for the city now. I'm a first-generation student. My background is in business, and growing up, I thought that I would eventually take over our family business at some point, as my mom probably would have wanted. However, it's a lot of work to be a business owner and to sustain your business. And so I actually, took a turn and, decided to pursue a business degree. And while I was pursuing my degree, I actually found an internship with the city, and that's really how I was introduced to the public sector. And really, to my surprise, I found that the public sector could provide, value or align with my values and what I wanted to contribute to the community. And so from a very early age, I knew that I wanted to contribute to our communities, and I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunities to be where I am today. And so that's the reason why, I have chosen, to be here and help our business community, because I felt that I had a background, and my experience that could relate to our business community. Azusa is primarily a Hispanic community, and so as a Latina, I felt that I could be that bridge to resources and communication. And so eventually through my work in economic development and with the business community, I stumbled upon planning and learned about the profession and the capacity it has to really make an impact on our communities. And so now I'm actually in the process of completing my planning degree at Cal Poly Pomona. Thank you.
Wonderful. Tunua.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and to my fellow panelists. I'm excited to be on today. Really, as an urban planning professional, if you had told me when I was a little girl back in South Central Los Angeles that I would one day have a career where I was doing something about the civil unrest that I saw happen in 1992 right outside my door, I would not have believed that there was such a career and that I could fashion such a life really focused on that. Today, I'm excited again to join my fellow panelists. I am now the Executive Director of the Local Initiative Support Corporation here in the Los Angeles office. Over my career, I have, for the most part, worked in the nonprofit sector, working in community development in neighborhoods in Boston and in South LA. Previously, I was Executive Director for the West Angeles CDC along the Crenshaw corridor. And I had a very short period of time, but I did spend some time in the private sector. And as part of that role, I was really focused on making sure that we financed and brought great capacity and support to organizations who were doing community development, housing, and commercial development in urban corridors. For today, I look forward to sharing a bit more about my experience and background and how I think that relates to what I consider to be one of the most interesting and exciting moments for the urban planning field. The greatest challenge that we have right now, be it COVID-19, be it racism, is really trying to figure out how do we reimagine our physical space in such a way that we are able to create the kind of great places that we all want to live, work, play in, as well as raise a family and do business. At Liske every day, I've been focused on making sure that we've got the 2 C's in communities that need it most. 1 C is capital. It's all about making sure that communities have what they need in order to grow. And so we are looking to deploy that capital in those places. But in addition to the capital, communities need capacity. And so as part of Liske, we're focused on training and best practices and toolkits and ways to ensure that communities have not only that, but even the leaders to help get that work done. So I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Tunua. So Rick, how about introducing yourself?
Sure, my name's Rick Willson. Happy to be with you today. I'm a professor at Cal Poly Pomona in the Urban and Regional Planning program. Happy to have Carina as one of my students. We have accredited bachelor's and master's degrees in planning at Cal Poly Pomona. I started my planning practice career in Canada and moved to LA for education and worked at the Los Angeles Community Redevelopment Agency in transportation planning. I have a consulting practice in transit-oriented development and parking reform. Among the classes I teach at Cal Poly Pomona are professional practice courses. So I'm particularly interested in helping planners be more effective, helping planners launch their careers, and helping them navigate the choices they face in practice. I have a book coming out this fall called Reflective Practice, but today I'm going to share a couple of ideas from my last book, which is called Guide for the Idealist, which is addressing this theme of idealism and realism in urban planning practice. I also have a blog that I write for APA. It has about 50 posts on it that's available to everyone regarding career questions, launching, and practice issues. So It's an honor to be with you today, and I look forward to learning from my fellow panelists, and thank the LA APA for taking the initiative with this webinar.
Thank you, Rick. So Maya, how are you doing on the audio there? Are you ready to try your introduction again?
Let's give it another try and see if this works a little bit better. Does it seem like you can hear me now?
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Move closer to the router, so hopefully that helps. But like I said, my name is Maya Abood. I work for the Housing and Community Investment Department for the City of Los Angeles. I've worked in housing for about 10 years now, somewhat affiliated with planning. I don't know if, I have a broad definition of what it means to be a planner. So I started actually as a tenant organizer in South Los Angeles. I worked with people who lived in substandard housing conditions to file complaints, to advocate for changes to local and state policy. And then I went to Sacramento, worked for a coalition of nonprofit affordable housing developers focused on rural communities, tribal land. Then I went to grad school and came back to LA and have been at HCID, Housing and Community Investment Department, for about 2 years now. I'm originally from Stockton, California. If you're not familiar, it's in the Central Valley. It's a place where a lot of people are displaced to, but there's a beautiful community there. I very much identify with Stockton in the San Joaquin Valley, even though I've been in Los Angeles now for about on and off 10 years. I came of age, I came of my profession during the foreclosure crisis, and that really rooted me in a sense of the injustices, the racial injustices, the power injustices, the financial injustices that are present in community development. And that experience, along with sitting in tenants' living rooms every day for 2 years, is what calls me to do this work and is what grounds me in this work.
Thank you, Maya. So as you can see, we have an early career, a mid-career, and 2 senior career planners with us here today on the panel, and that was by design. And so we're having this conversation today in a current environment where there's the COVID-19 pandemic, protests against systemic racism, a time when people of color are disproportionately impacted by the health crisis, where inequalities and injustices of our society and our systems, including education, transportation, law enforcement, food security, access to healthcare, access to capital, are standing out as problems needing solutions more than ever. This moment is important for planners because it's a moment where our professional skills and values can be tremendous assets to the change that needs to take place. And I wanted to take just a few minutes here to go through some slides from the LA Economic Development Corporation that was early on in the pandemic. This is the first slide. It shows the unemployment claims from the labor force by age group. One thing that you'll see is that those people in the job market who've been disproportionately impacted are young people of color. And this is the first in a few slides that shows that the 16 to 19 and 20 to 24 and even 25 to 34, if you group these together, is a huge swath of the unemployment that is being experienced in our communities. And what does that say? And what does that do for people as they look to their futures? The second slide shares what proportions early on, this was in about a month ago, that by race are being impacted by unemployment as well, and how much the share of the labor force from mid-March to April are Hispanic and Latino, Asian, African American, and white. So you can see here it's almost 60% are people of color who have been impacted by unemployment related to COVID. And this last slide shares the high school education, and this speaks to who has access to education, who has access to jobs after they're educated, what jobs require education, and who is providing us, I believe, with our services that we need in our society and that we utilize in our society. So you can see that people with a high school or equivalent education were disproportionately impacted by the unemployment situation. So I offer this really just as a backdrop to our conversation today, and I'm going to hand off the presentation to Rick now to talk about values.
Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I mentioned this idea of idealism, and just hearing the introductions of my fellow panelists is so inspiring and reminds me of the truly beautiful commitment that people that go into planning bring to the field. And it's every day I teach my students, I'm inspired about the future by being in relationship with them. So I think most people are drawn to planning for idealistic reasons, right? It stands at the origins of our profession, early housing reform efforts. Idealistic ideas are embodied in the AICP Code of Ethics. And I'm certainly an idealist, and that is the fuel for our efforts to make change for the better. What I've learned over my career, and particularly Margarita McCoy, who was a mentor of mine and a fierce idealist, was also a realist, and she often reminded me about being realistic about power, politics, money, human behavior, everything that's involved in making change. So I've come to think of my practice as engaging in a dance of idealism and realism, and it's a unique dance each planning practice episode I'm involved in. So a very simple way of saying this is decisions about when to push and when to compromise. There can be times when idealism can block progress because maybe the expression perfect is the enemy of the good would apply. And there's times when being too much of a realist can lead you to despondency and think nothing will ever change and I'm going to give up. So if you could go to the next slide, I've constructed a diagram that trying to organize my understanding of this concept. And I'm motivated in this thought to help planners avoid getting burned out and giving up about making change and giving up on their idealism. And on the other hand, having some practical wisdom of how to pursue idealism in terms of when it is appropriate to make broader coalitions than you might otherwise would, to make compromise and so on. And so I see this dance as the way that the most effective planners I know practice. But I also acknowledge that it's a hard dance to learn because it requires constant ethical reflection, because sometimes compromising is being a sellout. Sometimes it's inappropriate. Sometimes compromise is exactly what's needed to move forward. So as we're engaged in these reform questions regarding inequality of health impacts from COVID, structural racism, all planners benefit if they engage in a dialogue about how to move forward and carry their idealism into practice. So that's a theme I wanted to introduce for this session, and interested in panelists' experience of that or feedback on that as we proceed.
Thank you, Rick. We also have, Rick has provided us with these resources, which we will post on the APA website and which will be included in the video, which is a part of, which will be posted also on the YouTube channel for APA. So I am actually going to follow up on Rick's presentation with our first panelist question, which is, through the lens of current events, how do your values inform your work as a planner? And how do you think values can or cannot be a part of career strategies for planners? And how can idealism in our society be pursued when decision makers, supervisors, clients, and community members right now are in survival mode? So our first speaker on this question is going to be Tunua.
Yeah, so, you know, we had a chance to kind of talk through this, and I was thinking about, you know, what have been the values that have really informed sort of, you know, me choosing the planning career or field. So I talked about the fact that I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and that's when it was called South Central, not South LA. And I got on a bus every day and I went west, and I realized that the neighborhood changed, that it just looked completely different from, you know, everybody in my family's house and, you know, all of my friends in my neighborhood. And I got on that bus to really go to school on the west side of Los Angeles. And it was, you know, early on, probably about the 4th grade, that I realized that I wanted to have my neighborhood look like the neighborhoods that I was going into for school. Why couldn't my neighborhood look like that? And I think that that shaped sort of my first sense about the value of everybody should be able to have access to a grocery store. And in the mind of a 4-year-old, what was new and exciting and exotic to me was a grocery store that had bagels and cream cheese, right? Like, it was like every neighborhood should have this, and everybody in my, you know, neighborhood should have that kind of thing. Later in life, and I sometimes tell the story that as the first in my family to go to college, starting at UC Berkeley and then getting my master's degree from MIT in planning, it was, what will you be when you grow up? You know, and I'm on this bus, I'm thinking about, yeah, I'm going to make my neighborhood better. You know, my whole thing is that my community deserves to be better. And I remember an uncle, again, the first in my family to go to college, was like, Tunua, nobody's going to pay you to try and figure out how to fix what's happening in this neighborhood. Your best bet is, you know, you're a very good speaker. Why don't you consider law and, you know, make your move and sort of go that way. And that was, you know, that was tough, right? Because I was trying to figure out, well, you know, what do people do? You know, how do you make a career? And then as I grew older, and for me, kind of what made the change for me happened to be the 92 unrest. And that's when I decided that what I saw in my community, much like I saw just in recent times, is that people are desperate. You know, people don't know, you know, where they're going to work, what their circumstances, how they're going to make money. They were having a hard time feeding their families at that time, and we're feeling, certainly, you know, in Black communities and certainly communities of color, like their voices didn't matter, they weren't important. And a big part of, again, shaping my values and planning was about, not only does this physical space need to be better, but I want to be part of giving people hope and creating opportunities for people to access things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. So fast forward, part of your question was, you know, how do you hold on to those values and create a career, right? So if I had listened to my uncle, who of course is super proud of me now and, you know, is super proud of all the degrees I have and the accolades and the things that I do, it was all he saw. It was all he knew in the world. And what I have been able to do is hold on to those values. And those values have led me to work in Boston at the Madison Park Development Corporation, where I was in Dudley Square and engaging in neighborhood development and public safety issues. Those values actually helped me get from MIT what they call their HUD fellowship, where I was fully able to have my education and accommodations covered for because they saw what my values were. Those values have taken me back to my home community in South Los Angeles, having led the West Angeles Community Development Corporation, a very local CDC along the Crenshaw corridor. Those values have led me to build housing, to build commercial space, to focus on small businesses, to help people save their homes during the 2008 downturn. We were, when I was at West Angeles, the lead for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in making sure that homeowners were able to maintain their homes through foreclosure prevention. So right now, I do believe that my values, and if you value any of the things that I do, not only is there a space for you to work in the planning field, in academia, in government, in the nonprofit sector, but frankly, if it's not, I'm counting on you to create that because I believe that there are others who believe in those values, that we should have neighborhoods that are neighborhoods of opportunity.
Thank you, Tunua. Maya is going to also, is it Maya that we have? Yes, Maya was also going to talk on this question.
I'm muted. Okay, I'm unmuted. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Tunua. I think similar to Tunua, I stumbled into planning. I stumbled in because it aligned with a value system that reflects where I grew up, how I grew up. I mentioned that I'm from Stockton. I went to a high school that was about 5,000 people, of whom maybe 5% went to college, and most didn't make it from freshman year to senior year. And so when I applied colleges, I was given a scholarship because no one at that college had ever applied from Stockton. And I was given that scholarship. And then when I wanted to drop out because it felt so strange to be at a small liberal arts school discussing the reality of reality when everyone I knew was going through foreclosure, their families were going through foreclosure, gang violence was still very prevalent. And I just couldn't reconcile where I was going in life with everyone who I left behind in Stockton and in my community. And it wasn't until I took a class on community organizing. I ended up majoring in urban and environmental policy, and that gave me the language to articulate everything that I had experienced and everything that I saw growing up. And so it gave me the language to understand racial inequities, spatial inequities, and to be committed to changing the way our world looks and the way communities relate to each other, and to shift and address power dynamics. And so that is, I feel a tremendous amount of debt every time I go to work because of everyone that doesn't have the position and the privilege to be where I am, influencing housing policy that is directly impacted. And when I think about my values, it's not about creating my values in isolation. It's not my values alone. It's values that are created as part of a community. And it's important to me to maintain accountability to community. And I think that is how I have been able to integrate my values into my work, is that I seek workplaces that acknowledge and explicitly value the same things as me. I maintain relationships with groups outside of government, which is very important when you're in government, that hold me accountable personally and professionally to a bigger vision of what this world could be. And I approach my work humbly, which I also think is a very important thing. I approach my work collaboratively and recognize that my values are constantly being challenged and in flux. And that is part of the work we're doing. And if we think we have it figured out, then we're not growing, and we're not part of growing together collectively.
Maya, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Rick, I think you were going to add at this point to this question as well.
Sure. I'd like to address the question of going forward, how can planners with progressive values implement them in an environment where there's budget cutbacks and people are in survival mode. So I have just 3 quick points to make. First of all, there may be opportunities if in fact municipal budgets are reformed and money is reallocated from police department towards community development. The mayor of LA has pledged that, and there may be opportunities for planners to become involved in community development with greater resources than before. The second that I think is very important for all planners, I work in transportation planning and I work on parking, which seems like a super nerdy issue, but people do use parking as coded language for exclusion. Communities resist affordable housing. Small businesses cannot open because of onerous parking requirements. So I think all planners can look at the structure of our regulations and processes anew and try and make sure they are not contributing to discrimination or reflect racial bias. Third, there is political momentum right now from the protests that we planners can take advantage of. So in my experience, trying to make change over my career, these windows of opportunity open up, and there's a window of opportunity right now to advance a progressive planning agenda.
Thank you, Rick. So just to wrap up the values conversation, some of the things that I heard from Tunua and Maya and Rick today are that our life experiences shape how we see the world, and those life experiences and how we see and experience the world shape our values. And then as those values get shaped and as our perspectives evolve, we learn, develop, and understand language, codes, the unsaid, the said, and what we want to listen to and what we don't want to listen to, and what we want to apply and what we don't want to apply. And then with those values and in our professional lives, we ask ourselves how we want to be held accountable to family, to friends, to colleagues, to the broader vision. And then the question is, how do we take advantage of the opportunities for change when they come up, and how are we moving forward in that way? So I'm going to shift us into the next question for our conversation today, which is about current events and planning. Speaking of taking advantage of opportunities when they arise. How might current events force planners to make different choices in our work lives, our job choices, our career visions? And I'm going to start this conversation with Carina.
Thank you, Lisa. So yes, I believe that the current events that we are experiencing really force planners to be nimble. And I feel that the profession already is a profession that is forced to adapt, taking a realistic approach, evaluating our environment and really assessing the situation so that we can position our communities to thrive in spite of the circumstances. So I feel that now more than ever, planners need to be critical in bringing about change to our system and take advantage of this opportunity. And I really feel it boils down to access to resources. And so that's not something new, not something that we haven't as planners already heard. However, I'd like to say that it's safe to say that other sectors and other disciplines also have the similar goals as we do. They also want to see their communities, who are also our communities, thrive. So how can we bridge those two goals with an opportunity? And really what I think, planners need to take advantage of this and exercise cross-sector collaboration and really address the issue from the root cause rather than creating a Band-Aid fix. And this may be, an idealistic approach, coming from someone that is just finishing school, a recent graduate, and I have like this vision of what I want to do. But, I feel like we need to be strategic in how we're creating change and how we're making a difference in our jobs and in our communities. So what does this mean? Like, how do we do it? So I feel that as planners, we need to break down the silos in which we work in and break down the silos that other disciplines and other sectors work in so that we can align our efforts and really bring about change. So what does it look like? Perhaps it means that when we're hosting, webinars or conferences, we invite other, disciplines and other industries so that they can provide insight and create a bigger impact. There's a group of healthcare a group of healthcare institutions in the San Gabriel Valley who pulled their resources together to really identify, how they could better serve their communities and deliver better preventative care. And what they found in this health assessment was that the needs extended past your traditional health care, past, your cardiac health, your diabetes and your asthma. And what they found is that it takes a more of a holistic approach. And they found what they called social determinants of health. And these are, access to services around mental health, affordable housing, economic stability, access to jobs, access to transportation so that I'm able to get to my doctor's appointments. And I feel like these social determinants are not something new to planners. It's something that we already understand and it's part of our profession, and it really leads to social mobility if we're able to connect the resources to our communities. So therefore, as a planner, as an economic developer, I find myself asking, like, how can I bridge these different sectors? How can I bring them to have a conversation and deliver what we want, which is better communities and really access to resources. And again, I as a recent graduate, I may have like this optimistic and idealistic vision of what communities can become. And I really do believe you have to have balance. You have to strive for something bigger and better, but with a realistic approach. I really do feel we need to have, boots on the ground action plan. Like, how are we going to achieve this to really make an impact? And so I believe cross-sector collaboration is something that planners can implement in their job and in their career choices and how they move forward in the profession.
So, Lisa, am I responding to this?
You are next, Tunua.
So what I'm hearing is what can we do? There is a moment in time right now, an opening in history possibly, and a chance for us to try and make meaningful impact, long-term and systematic impact on the racism and negative things that we have seen, and all the things you outlined, Lisa, at the top of this call. What's going on, where are the disparities, and what's happening. So we're at a moment. I wanted to thank Dr. Willson for bringing up these code words, because code words are rampant in the planning field, right? And so as planners, when we go into communities and we hear, oh, there's no need for multifamily housing, this is a single family community, we recognize that that's code for, let's maintain these communities in terms of who is here, who has access to the spoils of land use and of land value. And that often means leaving people of color and Black people on the sidelines. We've heard, we hear code terms around, well, let's invest in Metro, for example, but in the train, not necessarily the buses. And we know that by and large, Black people are using the bus. And so, that's a code term that we have to unpack. In some of the work that I do, certainly trying to have an impact on the ecosystem of contract opportunities, billions of dollars that we make available for small businesses, the code I hear is, oh, is it the right quality? Is it fair to include other businesses in this process? And we know that's code for let's keep the dollars flowing in a certain way to a certain set of businesses over time. And then, a big part of what we do is we have to be prepared to test out things that challenge those code words. We have to be prepared to challenge that. And every day in our work, we have to really innovate programs that allow us to do that. I think about myself. Part of why my family had no idea that there could be another career for me other than being a lawyer is because we didn't know another Black woman who had become an urban planner. It's the kind of field that, there just frankly aren't enough. And so that's one thing that we need to do in terms of looking around at our organizations and making sure that we are creating those pipelines. So part of the moment right now that I think is critical is all about how do we change hearts and minds, because we've got good ideas. We're planners. We've been collaborating, thinking, innovating, and doing. We've got some great programs, but they can't scale. They can't scale because people's hearts and minds are not there. They don't believe that those things need to be scaled or should be scaled. So I'm using this moment to really focus on heart and minds. One of the programs that I started at Liske was called the Liske Americorps Housing Internship Program, what we call LA Americorps HIP. The concept there is that when I looked at who was trained in our state to be project managers for affordable housing development, we had a class at one point of about 70 young people, older people, and we had maybe 3 to 5 Black people. These are the kinds of jobs that are good paying jobs, that create careers, that give people an opportunity to be part of the solution. And what I was finding is that if you don't have the right degree in LA, UCLA, USC, a master's degree, keep in mind, if you don't have the right connection, people who are in these fields, if you've never had a chance to even be able to learn about real estate or know how to do it, you weren't going to be eligible, you weren't going to be selected. And that was leaving a lot of people of color on the sidelines. The HIP program was one of those things as a planner where I said, we need to solve this, we need to create space, we need to innovate. And hearts and minds weren't necessarily there yet. And we started out with a class of 6 or so over a summer. Liske invested in them in terms of training and support, and organizations were then able to take on project management assistants that they probably never would have selected those folks. They didn't have the right degrees and experience. At the end of even our first time around, nearly half of them have been picked up by their organization. Some people, and one person in particular, did not have a degree. And the organization had in its policy that you had to have a BA. But this person had been doing fantastic work. They had no idea she didn't have that education, let alone a master's degree. And they had to re-examine why they had barrier in place and what that was doing in terms of limiting people of color being able to access this career. Happy to say that the organization did the right thing. It's full of planners who were able to do some self-evaluation and decided that given the track record, the person had proved themselves that they were able to do the work at even a higher quality than folks with other higher education, that they were going ahead and bring that person on. So what can we do right now? We've got a lot of work to do. We've got our programs that we've already been doing and innovating. Now's the time to bring them up and try and figure out how to get them to scale. Now's the time to try and help people understand from a heart and mind perspective why we need to create, you know, one world, one LA, one place where skin color is not a determinant of your how long you're going to live in this world, and it is all about us individually as organizations and as individuals saying, what can I do? When was the last time I made sure that a little Black girl from South Central Los Angeles had exposure to what I'm doing and what the possibilities are for her?
Thank you, Tunua. Thank you. I love hearing about how this idea of scaling in particular, that this is the time for us to be scaling and to be really advocating. Yeah. So,
that's okay.
Yes, Maya, please.
And this is the earlier question that I didn't address about how do we pursue idealism amidst when everybody is thinking about survival. I think a key question for me that is whose survival is enabled by the structures. And for many of us, our employers are beneficiaries of the existing system. And I think we need to be honest with that and humble enough to recognize that we do have individual agency over the decisions we're making every day, and we can change. But we also need to know our place to follow instead of when it's our place to allow social movement to change and for us to respond. I think the first time in the investment department was the first time in my career that and that instead of being the protester. And I cannot make all changes by myself, and nor should this is a collective social response to our condition. And we need to be humble enough, we need to be enough of our own knowledge, our own institutions, and be willing to follow.
Yeah, humility, looking at structures, looking at our own institutions, this kind of reflective planning that Rick talks about. Rick, do you want to add to this conversation, which is kind of now a blend of this idea of current event planning and supporting professionals right now who are unable to find jobs, who don't have access to jobs, who lose jobs, and the structures that we all work within?
Sure. I think I'm particularly thinking about students from our program who've graduated this year and are going to be facing a very difficult job market. And because I'm old, I've been through many of these events, none as serious as this one though. And in the Great Recession, many of our students had to find employment outside planning and were essentially lost to the profession. During the last boom, there was a shortage of management planners, and the reason was the cohort during the Great Recession went into other fields. So I think the first thing is there's definitely opportunity for meaningful work with the planning agenda outside planning organizations, if that is the path that planners seeking employment have to take. But I'm also hoping that as a profession, and I think LA APA is all over this, how can we stay engaged with people that may have a delayed entry into our profession, keep them involved and welcome them back in a few years when things are better. So I'm I'm hoping that collectively we can be attentive to that and not lose a generation of planners from the profession because of the difficult economics.
Thank you, Rick. I would add to that too, kind of this broader conversation about who's getting laid off in the economy right now, and who is at the entry level, or who is at the administrative level in our organizations, in government, and in the private sector. Because I know, for example, cities that are having layoffs, they have a bumping system, and seniority bumps down the next person in the system. And often the people at the bottom of the food chain in the job hierarchy are young people and people of color who eventually are losing their jobs. And so, that's even a structure we may need to question in the civil service system around who gets bumped, who gets to keep their job, who is the incumbent, what does that mean, and what is that about? And I've heard stories of people individually taking a look at themselves and saying, do I really, what's my position and what's my role to keep or not to keep? I've had 25 years in this field. I'm ready to retire. Do I really need to stay? Carina, I think you are next in line on this question.
Yes, so from, what can the profession do for, our recent graduates, and for those of us that, are unable to find jobs in the circumstances? And my answer to that is continue to build us. The profession is continually evolving. We're adjusting to new circumstances all the time. There's always new information out there. So continue to build us and empower us so that we can, continue to make impact and changing your mindset. Although it's a crisis, how can we create an opportunity out of this? COVID-19 forced organizations who otherwise wouldn't consider telecommuting to telecommute. And so there were certainly, positive outcomes related to that. So how can we make, an opportunity out of this? I also do believe that not only do we need our profession to support the recent graduates, but I also challenge them to also show up for the opportunity. I know it takes a lot to walk into an organization or walk into a networking session, but really, take advantage of our network and invest in the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Carina. Tunua, you are also up on this question, although I know you covered it a little bit before.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm thinking back to very early in my career, certainly at a time where I described, I think people recognize now, when you're the first in your family to go to college, that means that your parents may not have the kind of friends who they can call and, connect with. And so I was really forced to learn how to network in such a way that I could build rapport with people and build connections. And what that meant, and of course this was a pre-COVID, right? So what that meant was that I strategically joined every organization where there was a membership opportunity, like the American Planning Association, like the Urban Land Institute, every organization where there was a membership opportunity could engage with people on a regular basis. That is something you might want to think about now. The other thing is that I also made sure that I was attending events and activities. So there's lots of things to look at online right now. You all are on this call. You're now being introduced to a set of people you may not have ever been introduced for in any other format. So show up to calls where you might not have any idea what to expect or what the call is going to exactly be like, but you might hear something or resonate with someone on the call that you might want to connect with later on. And, you know, just be vigilant about the flexibility in what you can do. Some organizations, they only have small contracts right now, do them so well that they don't want you to ever leave them again. Connect with others and tell everybody what you're doing. And hopefully, you know, to the extent that you can, stay in touch with your colleagues that you went to school with. I mean, I imagine we are on the line with other planners because everybody's trying to do the same thing. And I recall when I was looking for a job and colleagues were looking for a job, it's not about competition. It's about, like, one of us got to get in so that all of us can get in, right? And so there were things that I passed up that I said wasn't a good fit for me, but I knew who it was a good fit for. And if my friends are doing well, if my circle is strong, then that's stronger for me, because that means that they're meeting more people that I'm now going to put myself in the position to make sure I meet too. So, you know, think about those three things in terms of what's happening right now, and how you can contribute. The other nice thing is that I feel like with this generation, you certainly have LinkedIn and, you know, other social media. You can really start to connect and let people know what your values are. And you also will probably find like-minded people with like values and may find an opportunity that way.
Thank you, Tunua. And for those on the hiring end, and for those of us well entrenched in our organizations, this group, while we were preparing for this call, we sort of posed these questions for you. Have you looked at the internal culture around white supremacy in your office? Have you looked at the internal culture around the pipeline of planners in your organization? How do people get introduced? How are the opportunities put out into the world? And how can you impact that? And then also, we had a conversation about the process of government employment and how there are so many barriers to the process of government employment, namely just the amount of time it takes. And for someone who needs to earn an income and support their family, that time is an economic privilege. And thinking of time as an economic privilege was a new perspective for me. So thank you for bringing that up. So we do have a few minutes to take some questions. And I'm seeing some good comments in here, some compliments to our speakers, some points about listening. Two topics came up that I'm going to pose to the panelists. One was around capital and values, the intersection of the two, about where capital goes around and how that's connected to values. And the other question was around taking a look at our own organizations and who's in positions of power in our own organizations. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to pick up either one of those kind of questions or topic areas.
So I'm the one in community development finance. So I wrote a statement about the fact that capital flows to where our values are. And as someone in community development finance, I am constantly sort of rubbing up against, you know, what are traditional values around who should be able to access capital and under what circumstances and what type of capital people should be able to access. And I'm constantly rubbing up against that. The thing is, though, you know, it's imperative that I learn and that I know what are the traditional ways in which capital is used. That's necessary, right? You gotta, you know, whether you think of it as the enemy or not, you gotta understand what are the rules of the game. So that part I have now. And that is, you know, not enough, right? My heart and mind have shown and told me that that's not enough. What we traditionally do in finance is not going to work because of things like, when we think about the racial wealth gap, if Black families on average have 5 cents for every $100 that white families have, when we go to finance a Black-owned small business, we have to keep in mind that they're probably going to need equity and maybe not just debt. but the only product I've had traditionally is debt. And they're going to need equity because their white counterpart is likely to know someone, have a family member, have a network that will help them with that equity source. There's this whole idea of who, can own business even, right? Who can own? And so at Liske and in my role in looking at finance, I am piloting initiatives where the workers own the business, not just one person. And who gets, traditional capital would say, well, it's one or two owners, maybe a couple more, but that's about it. Not 10 or 12 or 15 people. Oh my goodness, no way. Traditional capital would say no. But given what we know about, quality of jobs that are out there right now, minimum wage just doesn't get it. People are not able to save. They're not able to purchase homes. They're not able to save for retirement. They're not able to save for rainy days. And yet access to this kind of opportunity to own can help change that trajectory. So yes, it is, our capital is, on one hand, we want to believe that it's, certain people will pay back who have certain conditions that are traditional underwriting standards. You've got the right you've got the right credit score, you've got the right collateral, all those kinds of things. But there's more to it. Our values, if we can hold on to them and press forward on programs that are focused on how do we create better opportunities, how do we chip away at the racial wealth gap, capital then can flow to those places and be ready to help take care of that.
Tunua, thank you. You're very well versed on this particular topic, and I know out there really changing the landscape. So we are actually at the end of our call. I want to thank each of you for taking your time. Rick actually helped kind of conceive and plan this with me, so thank you, Rick. And Tunua, Carina, Maya, thank you for your time today. I also want to make a shout out to Sarah Saeed and Christoph Sudledge. They're both on the COVID-19 committee, and a thank you to that whole committee for APLA, and appreciation for APLA for putting together this series. Our next event is going to be in July, on July, let's get the date here. I believe it's the same order on July 8th. I have to double check. Those of you who signed up for this event will get a notice, and the topic is going to be transportation. So thank you everybody for being a part of this event, and we look forward to the opportunity to do the work together. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.